God damn it. This guy made this video a few days before I posted mine. Whatever. I had this idea like a month ago, so it's not like I'm copying him. Anyway, we all love buzzwords. They're in our food, technology, politics. The problem with buzzwords, though, is that if you use them too much, they lose their value. Then if a situation arises where the buzzword is actually an accurate description of events, nobody takes it seriously. The word finds itself in a boy who cried wolf type of situation. And it seems we've fallen into this trap with the word fascism. Each side of the aisle uses exaggerated terminology to attack the opposite one. Anyone the left doesn't like is a fascist or a Nazi, anyone the right doesn't like is a socialist or a communist. And as a result, the term socialist has also lost its weight, but that's a video for another day. Today, I want to talk about fascism and how seemingly most people who use it don't actually understand what it is. In my experience, people often use fascism as a way to describe any authoritarian or potentially authoritarian regime. But while all fascism is authoritarian, not all authoritarianism is fascist. And fascism is a particularly nasty breed of authoritarianism, since it cannot be defeated through revolution or negative public opinion. Because, well, there is no negative public opinion. See, a plain old dictatorship just wants obedience and passivity from its population. If you support the official party line, cool, but it's not a strict requirement as long as you don't stand in their way. Fascism, on the other hand, no. Fascism needs you to support the party line. Or more accurately, you as a citizen feel compelled to support it. Fascism is when the population buys so hard into the state ideology, they are willing to give up their desires, their freedoms, even their lives in support of their dear leader. Whether it's because of propaganda or censorship or personal reasons, the overwhelming majority of the population rallies around the government to such a degree they essentially become one with the state, flock together like birds of a feather, or like bundles of sticks around an axe to form a fasces, hence the word fascism. Benito Mussolini is often credited with inventing the ideology. In his essay called The Doctrine of Fascism, he specifically writes, "The fascist state is an inwardly accepted standard and rule of conduct, a discipline of the whole person. It permeates the will no less than the intellect. It stands for a principle which becomes the central motive of man as a member of civilized society, sinking deep down into his personality. It dwells in the heart of the man of action and of the thinker, of the artist and of the man of science. Soul of the soul." See, it's the psychological component that separates fascism from just any regular authoritarianism. The Italians didn't just like Mussolini, they loved Mussolini. The Germans loved Hitler, and in Germany's case, the Nazi ideology was developed, which was an offshoot of fascism that carried all of its elements, plus the genocidal ethno-nationalist ideas that we all associate with Nazism today. The Japanese military loved Hirohito, seeing how they were willing to go on kamikaze runs to die for their emperor. I specifically say military because there is debate as to whether Imperial Japan can be called fascist, because to be fair, dying for your emperor is a common theme throughout history. It doesn't automatically make a nation fascist unless it has that totalitarian, population-rallying structure which Japan may not have necessarily had at the time. For similar reasons, it's up for debate if Francoist Spain was fascist, because Franco also did not have that devoted, overwhelming support of his population that Hitler and Mussolini did. Historians and political scientists are generally very careful with how they use the fascist label, because again, it's a word that carries a lot of weight and so it has to be used responsibly. For example, not many people call China fascist because despite them being a propaganda-heavy techno-dictatorship, from what I can tell, most people in China don't really have any sort of strong opinion on their government, whether positive or negative. The social contract in China is such that people don't really care what the Communist Party or its leaders do, so long as they provide the population with a roof over their head and food on their table. Authoritarian, yes, but not necessarily fascist. But people hesitate to use the label even in more convincing examples. I mean, just look at the Russian Federation, a state which is supported by a solid majority of the population. Even Russians living abroad, generally speaking, support the actions of Vladimir Putin and his government. Seriously, go up to a Russian living outside of their country and ask what they think of Russia invading Ukraine. They will most likely say that they're happy about it. And since they're living abroad, they don't have to hide their real opinion in fear of prosecution, which means that they actually think that way. Of course, inside of Russia, freedoms are next to non-existent at this point. You can't do anything that goes against the Kremlin's position, and there's been no popular uprising or mass civil unrest against this system of oppression, which, combined with the opinions of Russians abroad, shows that Russians, by and large, are content with what their government is doing. It's got all the rudimentary characteristics of a fascist state. And yet, people hesitate to label it that way, because while a majority of the population supports the government, it's not an overwhelming majority. Of course, it's impossible to accurately measure these numbers, but I'd say around 15 to 20% of the population tries to, at the very least, ignore what's happening. And there is a small percentage that actively fights against what the government is doing. But to be fair, people like that existed in Nazi Germany as well, and I'd argue that you don't need an overwhelming majority of the population supporting an authoritarian government for a country to be fascist, as long as it's a large majority. But again, these things are all up for debate. I think the most clear-cut example of fascism in the modern world is North Korea. The Kim family has absolute control over the country, the people have no rights or freedoms to speak of, and because of how strong and effective the propaganda apparatus is in the country, people do genuinely wholeheartedly love their dear leader. Because, again, under fascism, support from the population does not have to happen spontaneously. People can be indoctrinated into it. When Kim Jong-il died in 2011, videos surfaced on the internet of North Koreans crying over his memorials. And of course, people joke that, oh, they're all just being held at gunpoint. But no, a lot of those people were likely actually devastated by him dying, because that's how deep the brainwashing goes. Total government control, a population that fully buys into the state ideology and is willing to dedicate its life to it, those are the fundamental pillars of fascism. Now, thankfully, the US is not in that sort of situation. Based on the election and general public opinion in the last few months, it's pretty clear a sizable portion of the country does not support the government's policies. Despite being on shaky grounds, our fundamental freedoms are still in effect. There's no totalitarian population unifying state ideology taking over the country. For the time being, things are okay. The road ahead is tough, but not impassable. Countries that are at risk of fascism? Turkey, India, El Salvador, states which are not fully authoritarian, but can go down that path very easily given the current overwhelming support their governments have. Ultimately, be careful with how you use labels. It might be tempting to call someone a fascist or a communist for dramatic effect, but overusing these terms waters down their significance, and when a time comes for those words to actually be applicable, people might not take them seriously anymore. That's not a situation we want to be in. And that's the end of this video, guys. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did enjoy it, definitely consider hitting that like and subscribe button. If you want to support the channel additionally, you can check one of the links in the description or leave a super thanks under this video. As always, this was your captain speaking, and I'll see you later.